Nishchit Varma was the boy every parent trusted. Rayan Varma was the father everyone respected. Samaraya Varma was the mother who lived to protect her son, and Arya Malhotra was the friend no one ever suspected until a secret web of betrayal turned their lives into a nightmare beyond imagination. The summer air in Bengaluru was thick and heavy on the night. Everything changed for the Varma family. Their elegant home in Indiranagar, usually buzzing with the quiet rhythms of routine, felt unusually restless as the clock ticked past 9. Nishchit Varma, their only son, had not returned from his tuition classes. At first, his parents, Rayan and Samara, tried to reassure themselves. Perhaps the lesson had stretched longer than usual, or maybe Nishchit had stayed back to chat with friends. But as time dragged on, the comforting explanations began to crumble. By 10, the absence felt wrong. By 11, it became unbearable. At midnight, panic took over. Rayan attempted to keep calm, but every call he made went unanswered. Nishchit's phone was switched off, leaving behind nothing but dead silence. The usually stoic businessman found himself pacing the marble floors, dialing teachers, friends and neighbors. In desperation, Samara clutched a family photo of her son, unable to control the trembling in her hands. For her, the silence was the loudest scream. Their son had never been reckless. He was punctual, responsible, and cautious to a fault. His sudden disappearance carried a weight that neither parent could dismiss. The first break came when a security guard from a nearby lane phoned Rayan with unsettling news. He had spotted a bicycle abandoned near a dimly lit corner, close to the tuition center. Rayan rushed to the spot and confirmed the worst. Nishchit's cycle stood there alone, its wheels tilted awkwardly, one pedal scraping the ground as if it had been dropped in haste. The sight sent shivers down his spine. A chill ran through him as he realized this was no ordinary delay. Something had happened to their son. The news of Nishchit's disappearance spread quickly through the neighborhood. The Varma family, known for their polished lifestyle and respected reputation, now found themselves in a position no one envied. Friends and neighbors gathered, their voices hushed but urgent. Whispers of kidnappings floated in the air, while some speculated that perhaps Nishchit had run away. But the Varmas rejected the idea outright. Nishchit had no reason to escape. He was happy at school, loved by his teachers, and had no history of rebellion. The silence around his disappearance was more sinister than teenage mischief. Rayan contacted the police in the early hours of the morning. Detective Kiran Devraj, known for his sharp instincts, arrived with his team before dawn. The bicycle was collected as evidence, and officers canvassed the area for witnesses. Strangely, no one had seen Nishchit after he left tuition that evening. The lane where his bicycle was found was poorly lit, flanked by tall walls and shuttered shops. It was the kind of place that swallowed movement, leaving no trace of who passed through. Samara could not shake the image of her son, walking alone down that very street, his school bag slung over his shoulder, perhaps unaware of the eyes that might have been watching him. The thought gnawed at her as she replayed the day's events, searching for something she might have missed. Had Nishchit mentioned feeling uneasy recently? Did he complain about anyone following him? She remembered fragments, small things he had said about feeling strange while cycling home, or how someone seemed to stand near the tuition gates too often. She dismissed them at the time as childish imagination. Now they felt like unheeded warnings. The family's home turned into a nerve center of activity. Officers moved in and out, asking questions, checking phone records, and reviewing CCTV footage from nearby shops. Neighbors lingered at the gate, anxious but curious. Rayan tried to remain composed, offering statements and cooperating fully with the investigators. Yet every time he looked at the empty chair in his son's room, his resolve faltered. The polished desk, the neatly stacked books, and the cricket bat resting against the wall, all seemed frozen, waiting for a boy who had vanished into the night. By sunrise, the first 24 hours of Nishchit's disappearance had begun. For police, it was the critical window where every minute mattered. For the Varmas, it was the beginning of a nightmare they never thought would touch their lives. The city outside continued its usual rhythm, but inside the Varma household, time felt suspended, as if the world had paused to echo a single haunting question. Where was Nishchit Varma? Detective Kiran Devraj stepped into the Varma household with a presence that immediately silenced the room. His reputation preceded him as a man who unraveled the darkest puzzles with persistence, and the family clung to that hope. The first thing he asked for was access to Nishchit's room, believing that missing children often left behind the most telling clue. What seemed like an ordinary teenager's sanctuary, books neatly stacked, posters of cricketers on the wall, a half-finished sketch tucked into a notebook, soon revealed something more unsettling. Hidden in a drawer beneath piles of school assignments lay a spiral-bound notebook filled with writings that unsettled everyone who read them. The entries were far from what one would expect from a boy like Nish. His neat handwriting carried a tone of dread, recording feelings of being followed, watched, and judged. One entry described shadows near the school gate, another spoke of footsteps behind him on lonely streets, and one particularly disturbing page simply read, "It's getting closer every day." Though the words gave no names, the fear etched in them felt real, as if Nishchit had been documenting his descent into paranoia. Detective Kiran questioned Nishchit's best friend, Arya Malhotra. The boy appeared calm but uneasy under the weight of the question. He admitted that Nishchit had become distant over the past few months, no longer as cheerful or engaged as he once was. Arya mentioned that Nishchit sometimes confided in him about the feeling of being followed, particularly near the tuition center. Yet Arya confessed he thought his friend was exaggerating or simply imagining things. He had brushed it off as anxiety before exams, never realizing the seriousness of what Nishchit was experiencing. The investigators quickly pulled footage from CCTV cameras along the route Nishchit usually took home. The grainy recordings showed him walking steadily, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder. But as the footage was slowed down, something alarming emerged. A blurred figure appeared in the background of multiple frames, keeping distance but clearly trailing Nishchit. The face was obscured by poor lighting and the distortion of the camera, but the presence was undeniable. The realization that someone had indeed been following the boy was chilling. Rian sat stiffly as the detective explained the discovery, his jaw tightening with every word. Sama, on the other hand, grew visibly shaken. The officers noticed how she avoided eye contact whenever Nishchit's writings were mentioned. Her hands fidgeted, clutching her dupatta tightly as if it were a lifeline. When pressed gently about whether Nishchit had ever spoken to her about these fears, she admitted he had, though she dismissed them at the time. She had told him to focus on studies and avoid overthinking. Now the guilt weighed heavily, as though her disbelief had pushed her son closer to danger. Detective Kiran began widening the investigation. He ordered phone records and online accounts to be checked. He wanted to know if Nishchit had been in contact with anyone unusual. Officers also questioned the tuition teachers and other classmates, but no one noticed anything suspicious on the day of his disappearance. The frustrating lack of direct leads added to the growing tension. The only tangible threads were the writings in the notebook and the shadowy figure in the CCTV footage. Meanwhile, the community around the Varmas buzzed with speculation. Some neighbors whispered about kidnappers targeting wealthy families. Others spoke of cult-like groups luring children. Theories swirled, but none explained the eerie silence. No ransom calls, no demands, nothing to indicate what the perpetrators wanted. It was as though Nishchit had been swallowed by something far more complex than ordinary crime. As Kiran pieced together the fragments, he couldn't ignore the atmosphere inside the Varma home. Rian tried to mask his anger with determination, but he was often seen on calls behind closed doors, his voice sharp and impatient. Sama's unease too was impossible to ignore. She often excused herself during questioning, retreating into silence. To an experienced detective, these behaviors suggested that the family might be holding back something, perhaps unknowingly, or out of shame. Forensic teams continued to comb through Nishchit's belongings. In the margins of his notebook, faintly sketched symbols and coded doodles emerged. They were not random, they seemed deliberate, as though Nishchit had been trying to leave behind breadcrumbs. A single page stood out, a drawing of a key alongside a phrase that read, "The truth is in plain sight." It was cryptic and offered no immediate clarity, yet Kiran was certain it hinted at something Nishchit had uncovered. By the end of the second day, the investigation had reached a strange crossroad. The missing boy's writing spoke of fear and pursuit. His best friend admitted to his growing paranoia, and the CCTV confirmed he was being followed. Yet the biggest puzzle remained unsolved. Who was the figure in the shadows, and why had Nishchit felt danger closing in on him long before he vanished? As darkness fell once more over Bengaluru, the Varma family braced for another sleepless night, haunted not only by their son's absence, but also by the secrets beginning to surface within their own walls. As the days passed, the investigation into Nishchit's disappearance took a darker and more complicated turn. Detective Kiran Devarajan instructed his cybercrime team to dive deep into the teenager's digital footprint. It did not take long to uncover that Nishchit had been using a second identity online, one that his parents and even his closest friends knew nothing about. Beneath the exterior of a disciplined student existed a boy who had created a hidden world for himself in the vast corners of the internet. His alternate username led investigators to encrypted chat rooms and anonymous forums, places where conversations were steeped in sinister undertones. The persona Nishchit had built online was far removed from his real self. He spoke under a false name, engaging with strangers who discussed dangerous challenges and morbid fantasies. The conversations suggested he was seeking something he felt missing in his real life, a sense of control, adventure, or perhaps escape from fears he couldn't voice openly. What disturbed investigators most was the presence of one particular user, who appeared in almost every chat thread Nishchit was a part of. This user called themselves Shadow Key. The tone of their messages stood apart from others. They were not just participating in the conversations, but actively guiding them, manipulating Nishchit into deeper engagement. Dr. Elena Nora, a forensic psychologist brought into the case, analyzed the exchanges. She explained that the language used by Shadow Key was a classic example of psychological grooming. The mysterious user praised Nishchit's bravery, mocked his fears, and subtly pushed him to prove himself. Over time, the boy appeared to grow dependent on these interactions. His diary entries, which had earlier seemed vague and paranoid, now began to make sense in light of this discovery. The feeling of being followed, the sense of danger, the impression that something was closing in, all of it seemed to mirror the mental manipulation he was experiencing through this online connection. Investigators traced the digital footprint of Shadow Key, though the trail was frustratingly elusive. The account was routed through multiple servers, using techniques designed to conceal identity. Yet there was one breakthrough. On the night of Nishchit's disappearance, his chat history revealed a chilling agreement. He had consented to meet Shadow Key in person, at a location just a short distance from his tuition center. The language of the message was crafted to make it sound like a challenge, something only the brave would attempt. For a boy desperate to overcome his fears, the bait was irresistible. This discovery shook Ran and Samara deep. They had imagined their son's world to be secure, disciplined and sheltered. Now they were confronted with the image of a child caught in a trap set in the shadows of the internet. Samara wept inconsolably, blaming herself for ignoring his earlier hints about feeling what. Rayan's reaction was quieter, but more unsettling. He grew colder, retreating into long hours of silence, as though processing the enormity of what had unfolded. Meanwhile, Detective Kiran began linking the online trail with the physical clue. The bicycle left behind, the CCTV images of a shadowy figure, and now the evidence that Nishchit had willingly gone to meet someone, all painted a picture of a boy led step by step into danger. But the contradictions made the case hard. If this was a kidnapping, why had there been no ransom demand? If this was simply a case of manipulation, why had Nishchit's belongings been found in places that suggested violence? The breakthrough came when forensic teams revisited his note. Among the coded doodles was a pattern resembling a login symbol. When analyzed closely, it matched the design of one of the forums Nishchit frequented. The investigators realized he might have been trying to warn someone,
or leave behind a clue about the influence Shadow Key had on him. His phrase, "The truth is in plain sight," began to take on new meaning. Perhaps Nishchit had realized the danger too late and was attempting in his own way to signal who was behind it. While the case deepened, whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. Families grew cautious, warning their children about the dangers of strangers online. Yet for the Varmas, the pain was personal and unbearable. Their son was not a cautionary tale. He was still missing, caught in the grip of an unseen manipulation. Each passing day without answers only intensified their torment. Detective Kiran, however, felt he was close to cracking the facade. There was something about the username Shadow Key that bothered him. It was not random. It felt chosen, deliberate, perhaps even personal to Nishchit's life. He began to question whether this was truly a faceless stranger, or someone much closer than anyone imagined. If that suspicion proved correct, the betrayal would cut far deeper than the family could bear. 2 weeks into the investigation, frustration and dread filled every corner of the Varma household. Then came the call that shifted everything. A farmer on the outskirts of Bengaluru reported a foul smell coming from an old storage shed near his land. Police moved quickly, fearing the worst. When Detective Kiran and his team forced open the rusted lock, they found the interior suffocatingly still, the air thick with decay and smoke residue. Scattered across the floor were charred notebooks, half-burnt scraps of clothing, and a school backpack stained with something unmistakably dark. It was Nishchit's backpack, and inside were fragments of homework still intact. The scene confirmed what the family dreaded. He had been here. The forensic team worked methodically. Traces of blood were lifted from the cracked concrete, along with strands of hair. Though the volume wasn't enough to suggest death, it proved violence had occurred. Burnt pages contained fragments of Nishchit's handwriting, but some lines were deliberately crossed out with black ink, as though someone wanted to erase a story being told. The shed wasn't just a dumping ground. It was a place where something sinister had unfolded. What shocked everyone further was the discovery of the rental agreement for the property. The name printed in bold was none other than Rayan Varma. When detectives presented this finding to the family, Rayan's face drained of color. He denied any involvement, insisting someone must have stolen his identity. Yet investigators confirmed that the identification provided during the rental process matched his official document. Bank transactions tied to the rent payments originated from an account in his name, though the account itself appeared to be newly opened and separate from his known finances. The revelation sent ripples of suspicion through the entire investigation. Could the father have been hiding something? The idea seemed implausible at first glance. Rayan was a respected businessman, with a spotless reputation, but Kiran knew better than to dismiss coincidences, especially when a missing boy's blood and belongings were found on property under his father's name. He pressed harder, scrutinizing Rayan's calls and financial records. Late-night transfers, cash withdrawals, and unexplained payments to anonymous accounts painted a troubling picture. Samoa, already fragile, broke down under the weight of the revelation. Her defenses crumbled as she accused her husband of keeping secrets for years, though she admitted she had no idea what those secrets entailed. The cracks in the Varma marriage became glaringly obvious. To the public they had been the picture of stability, but behind closed doors, resentment and distrust had been festering. The disappearance of their son had ripped away the final layer of illusion, leaving only raw truth behind. As police dug further, another name reappeared in the shadows. Arya Malhotra. The DNA evidence taken from the shed matched not just Nishchit, but also Arya. Investigators revisited the boy's statements and began noticing inconsistency. He had claimed to last see Nishchit at the tuition center gate, yet camera footage suggested otherwise. Arya was present near the shed days before Nishchit vanished, though he denied any connection to the property. When confronted with this evidence, his calm facade began to waver. Detective Kiran saw the puzzle forming, but the pieces didn't align cleanly. The property was tied to the father, but Arya's presence and DNA connected him directly to it. Was Arya acting alone, or was there a deeper collaboration between him and Ray? Could the father have unwittingly facilitated his son's betrayal, or was he complicit in ways yet to be uncovered? Meanwhile, forensic psychologist Dr. Rina Nora examined the burnt notebooks more closely. Some fragments revealed symbols that matched Nishchit's coded doodles, suggesting he had been writing even in captivity. One charred page carried the words "Trust is broken," scrawled hastily as though in a moment of desperation. For Alina, the phrase suggested Nishchit realized someone close to him was responsible, someone he never expected to harm him. The community watched in disbelief as the case twisted further. At first they had sympathized with the Varmas, imagining their son's disappearance as a tragedy inflicted by faceless criminals. But as the news spread of Ryan's link to the shed and Arya's involvement, whispers turned to accusation. People speculated about long-buried scandals, financial debts, and personal vendettas. The family's reputation, once untouchable, was now in ruins. Detective Kiran, however, refused to get distracted by rumors. He knew the truth was close, hiding in plain sight. The trail had led from Nishchit's diary to his secret online world, to the shadow called Shadow K, and now to the boy who claimed to be his best friend. The connection between these threads was undeniable, but the real question remained unanswered. Where was Nishchit? Was he alive, hidden somewhere under Arya's control, or had the trail already ended in that abandoned shed? The shed became more than just a crime scene. It was a symbol of betrayal. The charred fragments of Nishchit's world pointed to secrets within the family, and the cruelty of a supposed friend. And as detectives prepared their next move, the sense of dread deepened. They were not only chasing a missing boy anymore, they were closing in on a truth that had the power to shatter lives beyond imagination. The investigation reached its breaking point when detectives raided another abandoned property tied to the same chain of rental accounts. The location was a decrepit warehouse on the outskirts of Whitefield, its windows covered in dust and its entrance secured with heavy iron shutters. The police moved in cautiously, fearing what they might find. Inside, the air was thick with mildew, the floors covered in dirt and scraps of discarded cloth. It was there in a corner of the dim space that they made the discovery which stunned everyone. Nishchit was alive, weak, disoriented, and barely able to stand. He had been kept confined in a makeshift enclosure assembled from old wooden panels. His clothes were torn, his body bore signs of malnourishment, and his eyes carried the hollow look of someone who had endured weeks of psychological torment. The boy's rescue was met with overwhelming relief, but it was quickly replaced by the darker task of piecing together the truth. Nishchit, though too fragile to give a detailed statement immediately, whispered fragments that painted a chilling picture. He spoke of being tricked into meeting someone he trusted, of being blindfolded, and of hearing familiar voices in the darkness. These words confirmed the detective's suspicions. This was not a random abduction carried out by faceless strangers. It was a betrayal, orchestrated by someone within his closest circle. Evidence soon tied the entire scheme to Arya Malhotra. The DNA at the shed, the digital traces of the username Shadow K, and Nishchit's own faint recollection of his friend's voice left no doubt. For weeks Arya had manipulated Nishchit under the guise of Shadow K, playing on his insecurities, fueling his paranoia, and convincing him to prove his bravery through the so-called challenge. But jealousy was at the heart of it all. Arya resented Nishchit's privileged life, the attention he received from teachers, and the affection showered on him by his parents. To Arya, this disappearance was not just an act of cruelty, but a twisted form of victory. Yet the connection to Ryan Varma complicated everything. Why was his name on the rental records? Why did financial transactions trace back to his accounts? The breakthrough came when cybercrime specialists uncovered that Ryan's identity had been stolen months earlier. Arya had gained access to his personal documents, using them to set up the rentals and fake accounts. By impersonating Ryan, he not only secured the locations, but also ensured suspicion would fall on the father if anything were uncovered. It was a calculated move designed to tear the Varma family apart while shielding himself from immediate suspicion. As the truth unfolded, the betrayal cut deeper than the Varmas could have ever imagined. Their son had been lured into a nightmare by the very boy they welcomed into their home, a boy they trusted. Samara was devastated beyond words, replaying every memory of Arya's visits and wondering how she had never noticed the darkness festering beneath his smile. Ryan, though vindicated of direct involvement, could not escape the public stain of suspicion that lingered. The family's reputation was shattered, their private anguish laid bare before the city. Detective Kiran summarized the case as one of the most disturbing he had encountered. It was not driven by greed, ransom, or even impulse. It was fueled by envy and obsession, by the fragile threads of a friendship twisted into something monstrous. Arya's plan had been to break Nishchit mentally, to isolate him, to reduce him to a shadow of himself. The burnt notebooks were part of the cruelty, an attempt to erase Nishchit's voice. But ironically, those fragments became the very clues that exposed the truth. The trial that followed became a spectacle, with Arya's motives dissected in public. Experts spoke about psychological manipulation, about how jealousy could transform into obsession, and how the digital world made it easier for predators to control their victims. But for the Varmas, no explanation could undo the scars. Though Nishchit survived, he was forever changed. His once bright confidence had been replaced by a haunted caution, a mistrust that even time might never fully heal. In the end, what happened to Nishchit went far beyond a simple crime. It was a story of betrayal at its most personal, where trust was weaponized and friendship became the deadliest danger. Bengaluru, a city buzzing with life and ambition, was left shaken by the reminder that the gravest threats are not always strangers lurking in the shadow. Sometimes, they are the people standing right beside us, hidden in plain sight until it is too late.